Imagine a world that sees 10,000 new styles daily. We're in it.
This is the Earth Day Party Podcast with Shannon Burns and Sarah Christie. Get in, bestie. We're going to clean up the planet.
Welcome back to another episode of Earth Day Party. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are diving into different conversations with experts all about the planet, sustainability, and what we can do to make a difference.
Have you seen that picture? It floats around on social media. It's made its way into so many documentaries. But it's a visual from satellite of an island of textile waste.
I have not seen that, and I'm already shocked that we can see that from space.
Yeah, it's just an island of clothes. So it's a mountain of discarded clothes in the Chilean desert, and it's visible from space. The pile is growing by about 39,000 tons per year.
Ooh.
Because we just won't stop buying clothes.
I feel like it's getting worse these days, too. You see so many things about fast fashion and companies like Shein that just are constantly coming out with clothes. And clothes don't just disintegrate, right? They stick around for so long.
Well, I know you're really into thrift shopping.
I am.
We talk about thrifting all the time.
As you are as well.
Have you noticed that when you go to a thrift store now, there are certain brands that just keep popping up on the racks?
Yeah, Shein is one of them for
Yep.
sure. And sometimes I see a piece of clothing that I'm like, oh, that looks so nice. But then you just really feel how low quality it is too, and how it's almost just falling apart, because clothes these days also I don't feel like are made to last anymore.
No, if something is $1 or $2, I've never shopped at. I am so proud to say I have never purchased a single thing from that store. Never even Googled it. If it's made for as cheap as people tell me it is, there's no way that thing is going to last.
Yeah.
And it is filling every donation rack. And sometimes I grab it at the thrift store and I'm like, are they selling it for more than the store actually
Whoa.
sold it for? Because I just keep hearing that these stores are so cheap.
Yeah, and you have to think too, how much are the people being paid that are making these clothes? Because it can't be anything that's ethical because of just how cheap those items actually are. But that's such a good point about thrift stores. They're probably making a profit off of these clothes.
Totally, which is an even bigger problem. But I think you should go to a thrift store at Christmas too. That's the most indicative, telling example of how I think we treat clothes and how we treat buying clothes nowadays. Because you can go in and it's just racks and racks of ugly Christmas sweaters, right? Because those have become the trend, and those are such a buy once and a one-time wear type of thing, where you buy it, you take the funny photo, and then you donate it and make it someone else's problem. And it's just a kind of a wake-up call of, okay, maybe I don't need to buy something new. Maybe I don't need to buy something to just wear it once and hope someone else deals with it.
Yeah, totally. You have to know that what you're buying is, going to stick around for a really long time, which makes me very excited for our podcast episode today, which is from Fashion Takes Action.
Yeah, Fashion Takes Action was founded in 2007 and is a nonprofit organization established to advance sustainability, ethics, and circularity in the entire fashion industry. So they're Canada's premier nonprofit. They're dedicated to transforming the fashion system for people and planet, and their mission is to remove barriers to sustainability and engage the fashion ecosystem to drive collaboration, innovation, and impact.
Very cool. And Kelly Drennan, who we were talking to, she is the founding executive director of Fashion Takes Action. She's our guest, and she's an expert, I feel like is even an understatement, because she co-wrote and published Canada's Textile Recycling Feasibility Report, a member of the G7 Circular Textiles Agenda Planning Group, created the annual World Ethical Apparel Roundtable Conference, has a TED Talk, and oversees a youth education program, My Clothes, My World, that she developed for students in grades 4 through 12. I don't know how she has time for anything else.
It really is so inspiring seeing her bio and what she's accomplished with Fashion Takes Action. Because we know, at this point, we know fast fashion is a huge contributor to the climate emergency. So talking to her is just really going to hit some important notes.
So what is the environmental toll that the fashion industry has on our planet, and what sustainable alternatives can we actually try out next time we're thinking about our wardrobe? Let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here. I did want to start off by asking, when we are talking about the biggest polluting industries globally, where does the fashion industry rank on that?
Well, it is among the top for sure, polluting industries. And some say it's the third largest after oil and agricultural industries. But That's not necessarily the truth, but it is responsible for anywhere between 4 and 10% of global carbon emissions. So that's more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. So it's definitely a huge impact there. And then also a major contributor to water pollution, biodiversity loss, and of course, waste.
How, I guess, is the question, because how is it contributing to the biodiversity loss? Like, where are these environmental impacts coming from? Because this is so important to really wrap your head around. We all wear clothes. These are things we should all know about.
Absolutely. A lot of the impacts, unfortunately, happen in developing countries where most of our clothes are made. The process of, creating the raw material, growing the cotton or extracting the oil to make a polyester garment, for example, is very energy intensive or uses a lot of water and chemicals, like for the cotton. You're looking at all the dyes and finishing chemicals that are used to treat our garments. And so a lot of that, because the factories are located along riverbanks with oftentimes hidden pipes, and a lot of this sort of waste effluent, if you will, is then just dumped into these rivers. And these are highly toxic chemicals, of course, that are, polluting people's only source of fresh water that they use for bathing or they use for even growing their own crops, right? And as well as drinking. So it does happen mostly. It's sort of one of those out of sight, out of mind, unfortunately, which is why we need to be raising a lot more awareness for this. In terms of local impacts, I think waste is one that we are starting to see growing in North America. In Canada, we contribute quite a bit of textile waste into the landfill. And the reason that that's a problem is if it's a natural fiber like a cotton or a wool, as it biodegrades, it does emit CO2 and methane into the environment, which are greenhouse gas emissions. And if it's a synthetic, so a nylon, a spandex, acrylic, or polyester, it's plastic. And so it's no different than a plastic straw or a plastic bag. It's going to actually stay in the landfill pretty much forever.
I feel like you see a lot of people shopping more often than we used to. A lot of people are buying from Shein and all of these very, very inexpensive places online. The dreaded Shein.
Inexpensive is a kind word, I think.
Yeah, definitely. What volume of textile waste is actually generated in Canada?
First of all, I just want to make a point that Shein and Temu they're in a new category of what we call ultra fast fashion now. So it's no longer the sort of Zara, H&M, king and queen of fast fashion. So they would put out about 100 new styles every week. We're now looking at 10,000 new styles every day by the likes of Shein and Temu. So overproduction is driving overconsumption, as are some other factors, but that results in about 92 million tons of textile waste that's going into the landfills globally every year. And in Canada alone, it's about 500,000 tons that we're putting into landfills here in Canada. So it's something like 80 to 85% of our clothes are ending up in landfill. And that's not us opening the garbage and throwing it in there, right? It's the chain of how things are. Some people definitely are, but then oftentimes too, whatever we donate to be reused or resold doesn't always happen, right?
So you mentioned donating there. We would think, that that's one of the sustainable alternatives of donating or thrift shopping, but what are the sustainable alternatives that we should really be focusing on here?
I think the first and foremost is buying less, right? We buy 60% more clothes today than we did 20 years ago, and we keep them for half as long. And the keeping them for half as long part is, I think, main reasons why. I think one is, the quality has, gone down. And so our garments just simply aren't lasting as long as they used to. But then also because we've got this sort of fast-paced, trend-driven culture that we live in, right? Or where the media is dictating to us what we should and shouldn't wear, or influencers or celebrities. So definitely got to slow it down and buy less, and then buy better quality and invest in our wardrobe. And you mentioned, donating, yes. And that's kind of part of this sort of more circular sort of behavior where we, trying to keep our clothes in use for as long as possible through resale or through repair is another example. If you're going to buy something new, always look for something that's made sustainably, from sustainable materials. Always go natural if you can over a synthetic. And then also look for brands that really prioritize things like ethical production and transparency and traceability. It's a big feat for a lot of brands to actually be able to trace their supply chain all the way back to the farm where the cotton was grown. And so there's a few who are doing this work, and it's really important that the customers look for that kind of information that's available. Upcycling is also a really fun thing. If you're actually handy and crafty, like being able to repurpose something and turn it into something new and cool is also a really, really great. So lots of options that can be had, and not all of them cost a ton of money.
If you go to a store right now, it feels like every other tag has a pretty green leaf on it. What is your advice for the shopper in spotting greenwashing when it comes to fashion?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think, we just actually conducted a study, and it's going to be published in the next few weeks, to understand not only Canadians' attitudes and behaviors towards sustainable and circular fashion, but also how they feel about greenwashing in fashion, or even greenwashing in general. And a lot of people surprisingly don't even know what it is. Canada has changed. The Competition Act has changed so that it is getting a little bit stricter now around, what claims can be made. I don't know if you're familiar with the 7 sins of greenwashing, but it's really interesting. We do go through them in our report, but the sin of sort of false labels, which is kind of what you're talking about, or worshiping false labels. So like a lot of companies are just making up their own little like logo thing that makes it look like it's actually a certification, or using really vague terms like eco-friendly. Like, what does that even mean, right? Or uses less water than what? So I think, unfortunately, the onus is on the consumer to A, do the research, and B, to sort of increase our awareness and knowledge around what's legitimate and what isn't legitimate. And not everybody has the time to do that. And so and it's not just happening in fashion, a lot of other industries are sort of capitalizing on that and taking advantage, quite frankly, of the consumer. So there are some truly good certification symbols. Like if it's organic cotton, look for the GOTS certified organic label. If it was fairly made, it could have a fair trade, some form of a fair trade logo on it. B Corps are always interesting. I like that one because a B Corp is more of a designation of a business, and it looks at sort of all the sort of the social and the environmental impacts of an organization. And so you can know that if they're B Corp certified, they're doing some pretty good things. But yeah, I think, we always have to approach clothing shopping with a level of skepticism and really kind of dig in a little bit deeper into what some of these terms might mean, even sustainable. And then recycled is another one that I think, it's worth pointing out, because that's becoming a bit of a buzzword now. And the reality is like, you might own something that says recycled polyester and think, oh, that's great. And in fact, a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when this first came out, I bought a winter coat, like a puffer made from 100% recycled polyester. And I was like, yes, this is great. It's finally, and it was like, I don't know, less than $200. And then I realized, like most of the industry, is that, recycled polyester today is actually just turning water bottles, plastic bottles, into a polyester yarn, which is, taking the sort of circular concept and then putting it into this linear system, right? So now we have the bottle industry saying, hey, fashion industry, we actually want our bottles so we can reuse them and recycle them into bottles. And that's the circular sort of system. Whereas we're sort of, taking something from another sector and making it into something that what can be done with it afterwards. So yeah, so be wary of, something that's labeled recycled, and hopefully in 5 to 10 years, when the technology actually scales and commercializes, we'll start seeing truly recycled garments that are made from fabric and not from plastic bottles.
Yeah, speaking of being weary, we have seen that some stores will offer things like textile recycling programs. Does that really work?
I think the term recycling has been misused, and not just by, retailers are calling their in-store take-back programs recycling programs. We see even charities and municipalities are using the term recycling when really all they mean is donation or reuse, right? So recycling is truly the sort of idea of, taking something apart, breaking it down into its sort of basic components, and then turning it back into something else. So when you donate a garment to an in-store take-back program, they work with a third party who's going to pick up those garments, and then they're going to resell them. Maybe they're a charity and they own their own sort of thrift store, which is the best case scenario, because then the stuff's being sold locally. Unfortunately, most oftentimes these garments that are collected in stores are sold to third-party brokers who then just basically ship it over to developing countries. So they're not recycling. So yeah, so definitely, I think it's something like maybe 2% now. Definitely for the longest time, it was like 1% of all clothing that is collected is actually recycled back into clothing. So it may be at 2% now, but it's really a drop in the bucket.
Seems like this is a good time for circular to come back into it. And Fashion Takes Action has a big circular fashion festival coming up in May.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about that, remode, and what circular fashion is if someone's hearing that for the first time?
Yeah, well, circular fashion is really about keeping our clothes in use for as long as possible. So that's by designing out waste in the first place. So looking at, from a brand perspective, thinking about what material is being used to make this garment, how many things that could disrupt the recycling process are being added to the garment. So that's things like buttons and zippers or glues and adhesives. And then also from our perspective, it's really, making sure that at the end of life, when we're done with it, that we ensure that there's another life for it. So it's sort of like this next life phase. And that's, again, through repair and repurpose and resale. So Remode is a very exciting event for us. The Circular Fashion Festival, this is its third year. It's happening May 3rd at the Well at Arcadia Earth. And it's really about teaching the average person how to keep their clothes in use for as long as possible. So it's been designed to really educate and engage the public through the 7 R's of fashion, which are reduce, because that's, again, the most important thing. And it's important to note, too, with the 7 R's that we created, there's the 3R waste hierarchy. And it is a hierarchy: reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is at the end for a reason. It is the last resort. So we believe reduce and reuse, too, are the top 2. We've just inserted 4 more, which is repair, repurpose, rental, and resale. We have vendors. We have a marketplace with no new clothes is the hashtag. So only selling thrift, vintage, or upcycled materials. We've got companies that offer rental and repair services. We have a stage that has talks going on throughout the day. And then, of course, we have the clothing swap, which is always a really big draw for the event. So we had over 1,000 people last year. We're hoping to have similar or higher numbers this year. And then we're expanding it to Montreal as well in the fall. So hopefully we'll be in a number of cities in a few years.
Wow, that's incredible. That sounds like such a great event, especially to give people those opportunities, but also educate them on what they can do. That's so great. Nice.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and, educating us on something that affects quite literally all of us. We all wear clothes. So if there's a way to do it in a more responsible way, then I'm happy that you were able to share that information with us.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
We went into that conversation thinking we were learning about fast fashion, but now there's ultra fast fashion. My mind is so blown, Shannon.
It's honestly so much worse than I even thought, and I already knew it was pretty bad. So that is rough.
If you watch the video version of this interview, I think our eyebrows jumped up and down like 40 times just at the shocking data we were taking in. So what are some of your big takeaways from that conversation?
Just really how bad it is, how the toll that it's putting on our planet, and how quickly it's speeding up all the horrible things that are happening to our planet that we are already so aware of. So I think that's what's really tough, is that I think we're more aware than ever the dangers of everything that's happening, but then at the same time, we're buying more than we ever have before. So it's tough.
Yeah, totally. But there's been a trend in our interviews with our guests, our climate experts and advocates, all pushing buy less.
Yes, just do less.
Yeah. Have you ever followed the hashtag trend on Instagram or TikTok, the underconsumption core?
Oh, yeah.
And it's people going around stores telling you why you don't need to buy things.
Oh, totally. That's really inspired me, especially I am a bit of a hoarder of bathroom products, of lotions and makeup. So that's been a big thing this year, where I'm trying not to buy new things and really just use up what I have at home. So very encouraging in that way.
There are also great documentaries at your leisure that you can watch that I think drive this message home if you want some eye-opening visuals on top of this podcast, of course. A few that I've seen, the True Cost changed everything. That is such an important one that also gives an inside look into the garment workers and the working conditions. Like you mentioned off the top, Shannon, what if they're selling clothes for that low of a price, what are the conditions of the people making these clothes? Also, Brandy Hellville.
That was a good one.
That was a big one because that was a real trend-setting time.
Totally.
When that store started making big headlines and started catching our attention. So those, I think, are really worth checking out.
Yeah. So what are you going to do differently after this conversation we had with Kelly?
Probably. Okay. So I always hear people talking about this. I don't think I've spent enough time actually trying it out, but just playing dress up in my own closet.
Oh, yeah.
And, I thrift almost everything I own. I think the new clothes that I bought have been socks and concert merch. But even still, like if I have something already, I still don't need to go thrift it. So just taking time to go and play dress up in my closet, and maybe I can make 6 different outfits with 1 pair of jeans, that sort of thing. So just setting aside time to do that and really get to know the clothes I already have. What about you?
Yeah, that's a good one, especially because when that feeling when you figure out a new outfit that you haven't put together before and you didn't have to spend a single cent.
Yes.
It's so satisfying. I love that. I'm going to do that as well. Also, I think this year I really want to keep track of what I'm buying. Sometimes I'll just buy a shirt and then I think I haven't really bought a lot over a certain amount of time, but then I look back and I'm like, oh, I actually did buy quite a few pieces of clothing. So I think just being more cautious of what it is that I'm buying and how much I'm buying is something I'm going to pay more attention to. And I'm lucky enough that my fiance is a woman and we have similar sizes of clothing. So I'm going to borrow more clothes from my partner. She doesn't know it yet, but that's what I'm going to do.
Sharing is caring.
Sharing is caring.
There's this thrift website that I used to shop from. I don't anymore because it's not Canadian. So right now, support Canadian. But they did something that I thought was so helpful. So they had pictures of outfits, and then it would say shop the outfit. So it would just take you to pieces of clothes that kind of look like that outfit.
Cool.
And I think that was such a helpful tip for me when I go thrift shopping. So for instance, I'll make like a Pinterest board of outfits that I really like. And then I know, okay, I'm just buying something similar. I don't need the exact thing. So then when I go to the thrift store, I'm not so overwhelmed. I know I'm looking for a sweater that's red or,
Right.
a pair of black jeans. I'm kind of focused because
That's
it can
smart.
be overwhelming.
I was going to say, I always have to be in the mood to go thrifting because you got to be ready to dig. So coming in with more intention, I think is really smart.
Totally. Do you follow Ginger Z?
No. Who
Okay,
is
so
that?
Ginger Z, speaking of Canada, is not a Canadian broadcaster, so perhaps you haven't come across her work, but she's the chief meteorologist at ABC News in America. And I love following her for so many reasons, but she is very vocal about her climate action, and she hasn't bought new clothes in 3 years.
Wow.
And she's on TV every single day, and she's advocating for not buying new. And so she makes it known when she's repeating outfits, when she's renting, when she's borrowing. And of course she is, because she's chasing natural disasters. She's there on the front line seeing what the climate emergency is doing. And this is her way of combating it, saying, okay, well, I don't need to buy anything new. And it's just really cool to see, because I think for broadcasting, especially, you think, where are all these clothes coming from? Where are they going? But she's just a really great advocate to check out.
I love that, especially because there is such a pressure, particularly for women in broadcasting, to always be wearing new trends and new outfits. And that reminds me of Zaya, who we talked to in our microplastics episode. I remember she had mentioned in an episode or an interview that she's done that she would always wear the same pair of shoes on TV. And she started getting messages from people being like, can you wear a different pair of shoes? But it's the same thing. She's trying to send home that message and really prove the things that she's preaching. So I love that that's becoming more of a thing.
You've rented outfits before, right? For all your red carpet events?
I've not for all of them, but I do try to rent them when I can. Even when I went to the Junos this past year, the clothes that I rented was a suit that I am planning on wearing for many years to come. I bought, but everything else, the tie and the shirt and everything else I was wearing, I rented.
It's great to know that exists, though, because I think, you get invited to weddings or
Totally.
just galas, whatever, when you have to dress up and you're like, I'm not going to wear this outfit more than once. Renting is such a great alternative.
So many great ways to really help out this cause and put a little bit less waste into the world.
Fashion Takes Action is a website full of resources, like for education, for yourself, for personal action. And so we'll link all of that in the episode description, as well as share more information about Remode, which Kelly talked about.
Thanks so much for listening. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Sarah, and thank you so much for coming out to the Earth Day party.
Earth Day Party podcast is in support of WWF Canada. Help protect wildlife and fight climate change during Earth Month with a gift to WWF Canada. You can give now at wwf.ca/earthmonth.